Hi everyone. Welcome to this online talk titled When Things Don't Go According to Plan by Alison. Um, Thank you for spending your sunny Friday afternoon with us on a screen. So I'm Julia and I'm the Associate Curator here at EC Contemporary. We are a non-profit art centre based in the Northern Quarter in Manchester, and we specialise in presenting and platforming artists and art practices that identify with or are informed by East and Southeast Asian cultural backgrounds. So we are in our summer program, which is called From Counter Archives to Activation, and we're trying to unpack this idea of what counter archiving looks like. Actually, when we think of archives, there are such traditional connotations and very conventional ideas of how archives work and what they look like. And I guess in this program, we try to destabilize this projected authority of archives, and we try to uncover overlooked stories, and we try to kind of surface these hidden narratives that are hidden in these archives. And it's been a really exciting and interesting journey of trying to highlight a multiplicity of perspectives. This talk is recorded and it will be posted on our YouTube channel after. So you can head there to watch if you've missed something and inform those who have missed out today. I'll just briefly introduce Alison Lam. We've been collaborating with Alison for a few months now. She is a neurodivergent, interdisciplinary and socially engaged artist. And she talks about her experiences of motherhood and raising children with autism in a British cultural environment and how that shapes her identity and as well as her practice, and how these exist hand in hand. So part of Alison's project called Mind the Gap, which is funded by Arts Council England's National Lottery Project grants, manifested in a series of paper and clay workshops with neurodiverse individuals and their carers at EC Contemporary, titled Holding Space. So we've been able to examine moments before and after overwhelm and try to identify and explore this journey with these individuals, as well as talk about our own experiences as well. So I guess this talk becomes almost an outlet or a conclusion of these physical workshops that have taken place. So the structure of today is going to look like Alison will give a presentation until I'm finished talking, until around 4 o'clock, and it will be followed by a conversation between Alison and I. During the talk, please feel free to take to enter your questions into the chat. You can type them out as they arise as we go along, and that'll be really great. So we can have a discussion kind of with you afterwards as well, because we love this idea of like being engaging and participatory with the audience as well. And finally, it will end with an activity that delves into some of the practices and methodologies that we'll touch upon today. So with no further ado, Alison, over to you.
Hi, I'm Alison Lam. So I am going to share the screen. So just bear with me while I do the technical bit. Okay. Hopefully, if there's any problems with anyone viewing anything, do put it in the chat and let EC Contemporary know what's going on. So my name is Alison Lam. I'm a social practice artist, and I am also an activist and an advocate for autism and SEN rights. SEN is obviously an acronym, and there's a lot of acronyms in my life which I've learned to navigate, but SEN is special educational needs. So it's for those parent carers that have children or young adults that would need a little bit more care in their education. I often also say I'm a mother always, because that is a forefront of my practice. It informs a lot of my practice, and it makes me think about how I address my practice from all different angles, but mainly as a mother and navigating that. I am a qualified art teacher. I bring that in because I think it's quite interesting to know that I also understand the education system in the UK, because I worked as a teacher in secondary education for over a decade. So I think that gave me a lot of insight and help into how I navigate my own practice and my own children. So just on the first slide here, I've just put a little bit of my probably important moments on my recent career. And that's obviously awarded, I was awarded Arts Council funding twice, the DYCP in 2022, and then now currently the National Lottery Project Grant, as Julia said, which has been awarded, and my project runs through until March 2025. I am on the committee for lots of SEND reforms, both in Haringey, and I'm part of the all parliamentary groups as well regarding SEN reform. I've done some research with an ex-tutor, which was about the art of engagement, which was a sort of four-pronged research regarding how social practice can be navigated and supported more by institutions, and if there is a need for that, more so in big institutions. And this ran with Middlesex University, which I was part of, the Tate in London, Queen's Museum, and Social Practice City of University in New York with Gregory Schlett and Chloe Bass, who run that course there. I myself was very lucky that I did a master's in MA Art and Social Practice under Lorraine Leeson and Alberto de Man, and that was at Middlesex University. Sadly, the course no longer runs, but it was a very pivotal point in my career, as you'll get to see a bit longer. So these are sort of the things that I've done. And then I've called this PowerPoint my talk "When Things Don't Go According to Plan," because I'm navigating my British Chinese culture within the UK and bringing up children of neurodiversity within that remit of those two cultures. And there is often, I think, for many that are EC background may understand a little bit more about where I'm coming from. And I hope to explain a little bit more about that throughout the talk. So the plan was, I was expected to be good at maths. I was expected to be very good at academic subjects. My parents of Chinese descent wanted me to be a doctor. And all at the same time, I was supposed to be very demure and a very good housewife and really good, hopefully be married to the right family with the right, within the right culture. And that culture seen by my parents would have been someone that is of East Asian descent also. So it was very difficult because I think from a very young age, I knew I was absolutely awful at maths. My passion was the arts. I was living in the art department all the time. I have to just explain that I came to the UK at the age of 7, 8, and there was lots of changes. You know, we got off the plane from Hong Kong where it was sunny. We were in our sandals. I was in a summer dress and it was grey and it was miserable and it was 6 o'clock in the morning and there was a lot of dew. And I remember my siblings and I very much thinking, why are we here? Why have we left Hong Kong? That nice warm weather. So it was quite a culture shock. So that was the first thing that I remember, the massive culture shock to coming to the UK. And I came in the 70s, late 70s. So very different, very new environment. We were probably the restaurant culture. My family came because they wanted to start restaurants in the UK. And obviously this was the place to be. Because of that, that was also another difficulty because many Chinese families coming over from Hong Kong to set up this life of opening up a takeaway or a restaurant, they would obviously go to places where they were quite remote and there were no other Chinese takeaways because that meant you would do well in your business. So that obviously also, by default, ostracized us a little bit from the Chinese community, which was quite difficult to navigate again, because coming from a very Chinese background, you know, culturally, and having lived in Hong Kong, this was quite different for us in all cases. My plan became slightly different because I think at school I realized that I had difficulty with learning. I now years later, realized it was because I was neurodivergent, and obviously navigating that within the Chinese heritage expectations were very different. So just to give you an idea, this piece of work was done as part of my DYCP work, where I collected loads of conversations. You can see in the background, they're actually calligraphy paper. I burn text, which is basically I collect loads of words, and the most prevalent ones I will burn into calligraphy paper and I dip into wax. These have the very brittle wax, which has long strands, which against the wall of the gallery slowly crumble and might get knocked and broken. So much like the fragility of neurodivergent language, it's very fragile, and life can be quite fragile. So I feel that this work depicts a lot about how myself and my children and many of the participants from Conversation Starters, the DYCP project, were feeling around neurodiversity. So these are words that came out a lot. I use a lot of corpus linguistics in my work. So I tend to collect work, it goes into transcriptions. Those transcriptions get funneled out through a lot of sort of AI software, which then I ask it to give me the hierarchy. And these are some of the higher ranking words that came about, really. And I tend to sort of then research those words more. So that's how I kind of work. The never feeling quite British enough or Chinese enough came through me throughout my my careers. And being an artist, luckily, I was able to do a lot of research about what that actually means. And it's a lot of soul searching for me. I read a lot of books and I read a lot of work. I haven't gone into all of it into my slide because I've actually given you a bibliography at the end of this slideshow because it's easier for you to sort of see the most prevalent works that I read. But I had a lot of thinking around navigating neurodivergence within my Chinese and my British culture. I always felt like I wasn't one or the other. I felt like I straddled somewhere in between, and at different situations and at different events or, you know, family events, I became more Chinese. You know, the spoken language at home was Cantonese. We'd go straight into Cantonese. So you became automatically, I felt like I put that face on as such, if that made sense, that mask. And then with friends at uni or growing up or working in a very sort of British society, I felt like there were certain things I almost hampered down a little bit. So I kind of just, my Chineseness didn't come through so much. So I became more British. And there was a big push by my parents to actually speak well, you know, be eloquent, be articulate, speak with an English accent. Don't lose that Chinese accent. So we lost our Chinese accents very quickly. I mean, I later also discovered you do if you move to a different country before the age of 14, you generally will lose your accent. But if I came here after the age of 14, I would have probably retained it. So that's something, again, that I navigate. And I then, during my MA in 2017 to 2019, I went to the Asmoleum Gallery Museum in Oxford and discovered Kai Kwan Quen. I can never say his name, apologies. But I discovered his work because he had an exhibition there. And I really resonated with some of the works that he did. I really loved the way that he talked about the relationship between Eastern and Western cultures and navigating that. And actually also another theme that became very prevalent to my work is otherness. Where do we sit in the global experience of being the other? What does that mean to all of us? And especially what does that mean to me being neurodivergent in this other world of already feeling in between British and Chinese culture? So his work has resonated with me a lot. And I've often delved quite a lot into his work. The explosive, those of you that are not familiar, he works with gunpowder and the explosive elements that he sets light to the gunpowder on the paper or on objects. And he sets these incredible installations up to explore those ideas of navigating that idea of other, and which I really resonated with. So this is something that really became quite prevalent when I was looking at my my work. And I think I discovered during my well, I was discovering before my master's, but especially during my master's, this idea of wanting to see how far we can push the limits of a process or materials. And that was something that came back for many, many times. And during that time, I started playing with a lot more calligraphy and a lot more burning of paper. And I think the influence was greatly from having seen this exhibition. So I just want to go into, obviously through research and just looking at my own identity, my own cultural identity, I discovered Anthony Key. And I'm not sure how big a known artist he is. For me, he was quite big. I was really excited when I came across this work because the work is the kitchen, and the kitchen was representing his growing up in a takeaway. And all the kitchen, the walls and everything that you see on this slide are made from the old tin foils, the takeaway boxes. And it really resonated with me because I spent a lot of my life and childhood in the kitchen helping my father seal up. And apparently there's a way of sealing up. There's a quick way to sealing up these tinfoil boxes. I mean, I was taught to do that. And I remember being quite proud because I was quite quick at it, but my finger and my thumb would be so sore at the end of the day. And this really resonated with that sort of feeling of what is a part of us, and how much the kitchen, and especially a restaurant kitchen, really resonated, because that was our main kitchen as well. So it was not only the kitchen for the restaurants, it was also the family home kitchen. We used that a lot more than using the kitchen above the restaurant. So I really love what he wrote about. He said, I believe we carry a metaphorical and invisible kitchen around us. So this is what I have built. And it was really prevalent to something that really resonated in my growing up in a sort of Chinese restaurant, Chinese takeaway culture. So I'm now going to go into talking about living as a neurodivergent and caring for neurodiverse. So I myself have 3 sons, 2 of which have complex needs and what they would deem as a disability. I put this slide on here because I wanted just people to understand what is a disability. A disability doesn't mean it's necessarily physical. It could be a mental impairment. It just has a substantial or a long-term effect, negative effect on your ability to do daily and normal daily things. And then I also look at a lot what is meant by social model of disability. So the social model of disability says disability is caused by a way of society is organized rather than a person's impairment or difference. It looks at a way of removing barriers that restrict life choices for disabled people. Now, I do classify myself as having a disability, though I see it as quite mild, or I see it as I am able to navigate the society we're in with a little bit of support. But I do see that I take longer to process information. I often struggle with lots of information and information overload. So I'm often striving to make my work accessible to others. And that's really key for me. And when we talk about existence of otherness, feeling other as a disabled person, it is, what are the different modes of being among us? What do they look like? How do they resonate? Can I explore otherness and that different mode of being other within my work, within the work that people see, and let people resonate with that? So it's something that's really important to me. So this is just really quickly the couple of books that I sort of refer to, which is The Politics of Cultural Identity, Ethnicity, Nationalism and Multiculturalism by Martin Strotz. So it just talks about how cultural identities are formed and the role of otherness in this process. In The Realm of Senses, Social and Aesthetics and Sensory Dynamics of Privilege by Sophie Hayes, this paper actually explores how otherness is sensed and experienced within different social contexts. So again, looking at the same ideas that I was kind of really exploring through my work and making me think, right, this makes sense now. So I did sort of hit into an area which made it much more sense for me. So this is my practice. My practice is social practice. My work is all born of work which is collaborative, meaning that I run workshops, I run groups, gatherings, coffee mornings, you name it, any kind of gathering that there might be. I tend to use art making as a form of connection because I find art making generally through papers that I've read about calms the mind. So I'm not an art therapist and I don't deem myself to say that I am, but I've looked at a lot of papers and research around art therapy and how art making and using our hands can relax the brain to therefore explore things in a much deeper and open and non-restrictive way. So this is something that I often want to do. So all my work is born from that. And I'm really interested in, and I'm creating an archive. I have an absolute huge archive of oral stories. I sound record every workshop I have delivered. So there's a lot of information that I collect from neurodiverse families and individuals. And I would say that I'm a social practitioner because I'm wanting to amplify those voices. So that's what makes it not just socially engaged, because I am using social engagement as my practice, but the social practice side of it is because I want to amplify that voice, collecting many. So just to talk about a couple of other artists, I mean, there's many that I can go into. Suzanne Lacey is somebody that I really, really admire. This is it's just a very, not the best picture, I apologize, but it's the inside of a caravan. It was basically a caravan which she turned into like a library, and she invited people to put objects in. And it was objects about, this was done in Mexico, I think, which was about different people, the violence there, the need for that community to actually almost engage in illegal activity in order to sustain their living. And quite incredible, the stories that came out from that. It's called Skin of Memory. It was done in 1999. And she's somebody that I really admire in what she does, and the communal storytelling and making that she does, and inviting people to interview others on this bus. It was quite incredible. Another journal that I read a lot and look at, which I think is really good for social practice, is the Field Journal. And that is something that's been going for a long time and was actually started up by Grant Kessler. So Grant Kessler has written conversation pieces, which again talks and examines what it is to be a social practice artist. So again, very much resonate with my field of work and my practice. So this goes into me a little bit more. So this is really me when I'm working. That's my happiest moments, when I'm working with different individuals and different communities. I've been invited to run these workshops. Luckily, I did a set at EC Contemporary also with Venture Arts, but this was in London, these ones. I've worked a lot alongside Camden Disability units, and through them, I was lucky enough to use October Gallery space because they're all in Camden. So they were really happy to give back to using that space. So this is how I collect my work. This was Arts Council, which was where one of the last major projects that I did. And this was Conversation Starters. And it really actually resonated with me in navigating how we collect conversations. So all the work that you see here, all is made from, it is actually twigs and branches, as we can see in the bronzes. But within the twigs and branches are text and conversations written onto leaves, onto paper. The paper I then dip into porcelain or sculpt into porcelain, as you can see on some of the onto some of the porcelain pieces. I dip into porcelain and I dip into bronze because I'm holding safe those messages. So often a lot of people are happy to give me their stories if they feel there's some kind of anonymity to it. They don't want their name there, or they're worried about seeing it in the physical sense. So I often say, look, I had to come up with an idea, and I said, I'm going to make these messages safe. So they're safely received messages. You can write whatever you want. I'm going to dip them into wax and make them into bronze. I'm going to dip them into porcelain, and then the paper burns away. And we're just left with the encapsulation that holds that message. So I think it's very key for me that we're holding that message. The written scrolls that you can see in the background are written in Chinese calligraphy, and they're written in spoken Cantonese. I work alongside a illustrator, Wilson So, because I can only do conversational Chinese. My written Chinese is probably of a 7-year-old. It's not great. So I wanted to unpick this other layer of what do we understand? What do I understand? Navigating words in Cantonese to describe my neurodiversity, because I was actually struggling with having these conversations with my own father to explain his grandchildren are neurodiverse and what that meant to him. And actually, Dad, I also am neurodiverse. And it was really tricky to navigate the conversation to be able to understand and unpick it. So I like the play with, if you're really interested in what these words mean, you will look at the translation and you will decipher what they would mean. A lot of this exhibition also had a lot of Morse code. I have a couple of young people that I worked with that only wrote in Morse code. So I had to decipher what they were trying to say to me. So that in itself is another layer of understanding disability and how we navigate understanding something that's not necessarily easy to read in front of us. Mistranslation is another piece of bronze, which was done part of this project. And in this inside of the bronze, you can see there's Chinese calligraphy. I burnt out the text again. And then when I cast it into bronze, I retraced those words with gold leaf, which was quite tricky. But again, keywords that were from devised from corpus linguistics to tell me which were the most prevalent words used in my conversations that I collected. Again, another view from Encrypted. It's a room with all the scrolls, and a lot of them are written, and they are written in conversational Cantonese. The reason they're written like this is because if somebody read them back out to me, I understand them. But if they were written in formal traditional Chinese, I probably would have difficulty understanding. Safe messages received. This is where they all started. There was a collection of around 90 messages scribed onto calligraphy paper, and then I dipped into porcelain. And that's part of the collection that you can see there. I'm very, very driven by other artists, obviously, and another artist that I'm very keen on and has really influenced a lot of my work is the idea of putting discarded objects together. So a lot of my pieces of work are often the broken pieces that don't always work. So I like to keep them and I put them all together. And Louise Nevelson is somebody that really resonates with the way she works with putting one object, but one object becomes many. And I love that idea that it looks to me like she's almost creating order from disorder and using the discarded object to create a sculpture. So I like that idea of what we use of creating aesthetics from discarded objects. And a lot of my pieces of work are not perfect. They're often bits break or some of it isn't quite gone according to plan. And that is something that resonates with my work, that it doesn't all go according to plan. Just a quote from Joseph Beuys, which is something that really resonates with me again. Art is not there simply to be understood. It's more a sense of an indication or suggestion. And Joseph Beuys is something, I put Joseph Beuys on the bibliography, by the way, just as Joseph Beuys, because I believe that if you're interested in social practice, then he's somebody that you should read about. And there's a lot on him, actually. So it was very difficult for me to pick one particular book or one particular writing about him that I thought was important. So, oops, sorry. This one here is, again, objects can make us stop and look reflective. I often create things that look aesthetically pleasing because I want people to look more at them. I want them to think about what we look at and why we look at it. Same as neurodiversity and navigating that space. This is more recent work, which is what is part of Mind the Gap, which is, this is where I leave you. and it's a collection of bronze and porcelain lotuses which have messages embedded in them again. This also, as many of you may see, has lots of links with Buddhism and Buddhist beliefs, because my mother was Buddhist and brought us up as Buddhism, and the symbolism of the white lotus and the traveling of rebirth and reborn is something that's really important to me when I'm navigating conversations and these projects around neurodiversity and how that means to people. So that's kind of there's a lot about numbers as well in Buddhism. I could go on forever, but just very slowly, quickly, about the 108 feelings and feelings that we go through life and death through Buddhism is something that resonates a lot with me. So often I use a lot of different numbers connected to Buddhist beliefs in my work. I often get interactive feedback from my exhibitions, because these again then navigate into another realm of how people give me evaluation about what I've been doing. And I think it's something that's really key as a practitioner, and especially social artist practitioner, because we don't know if we're hitting the right spots, as it were, and if we're amplifying that voice enough. So that is something. I'm going to leave you with this video really quickly. This just some of the many messages, and I love the fact they're written in lots of different languages from all the different people that have seen the show. This was from a show at Ugly Duck, so it was quite central in central London. So, sorry, and that kind of concludes the PowerPoint. Shall I stop sharing? There we go.
Yes, please. That would be great. Thank you so much for that very rich presentation. I'm sure we all have a lot of questions. Well, I certainly have a lot of questions. But if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A chat, and I'll select some to ask Alison. But whilst you're doing that, I think I have some to get us started. I guess this is more of a comment. I'm really inspired how your work becomes a physical manifestation or a materialization of these fleeting conversations, because I think my research has been a lot about how do we arrest moments, and especially with like public programming and workshops, it's like once they've passed, you can't really get it back, and it's not really documented. So then it's like when an artwork becomes the accumulation of it feels like we understand archive in a different way. And I really enjoy this idea of liminality and this in-between space that we have to create as British-born Chinese. I think it's a metaphor for cultural identity, that we're not one or the other. And actually we have to redefine and create a new space for that. So my first question is, I guess, do you consider yourself a diasporic artist? And how, I'm just interested because in a lot of the workshops, there are not that many East or Southeast Asian participants. So I was just wondering, how does the Western audience receive your cross-cultural practice or understand your methods of making, especially when you use, I guess, gentle traditional materials such as porcelain or like calligraphy?
I mean, it is difficult because I have tried to read, and this is where the conversation is quite difficult, because you know, I want to reach the Chinese diaspora more. I'd love to, you know, the audience I would love to reach, but that is a cultural thing and stigma, as we know, about how open we are about having a disability, because you know, there's a lot about Chinese culture, which is we keep it very much in the family. The family will deal with it. We don't need to bring outsiders in. We don't need to tell everybody our business, as it were. We don't share too much. There's a very much there's a pride in that, in keeping that family value. And so I have found it really difficult to reach out to the Chinese community, because I would love to more. I'm resonating more and more within the Chinese communities in London, and I'm hoping to bring more of that in, because that is something that's quite interesting to me. What I'd really like to do in my heart of hearts is to be able to navigate both the Western community with the neurodiversity, but also the Chinese or the East Asian communities, to get an understanding and gauge more of what they want to say, because I think they'll be quite different actually.
Mm.
And then in terms of, do I see myself as Chinese diaspora? I don't know. And that is the honest answer I can give you. Because sometimes I feel really Chinese. You know, when I
Mm-hmm.
have my Western friends are like, what are you talking about? What, you're not making sense. And I'm thinking,
Mm.
oh, but when I talk to an East Asian friend, they totally get what I'm saying. It's like
Mm.
instant. There's this sort of non-verbal understanding.
Mm.
And like you say, that liminal space, it's automatically there and understood, but
Mm.
it doesn't necessarily come so easy if I'm talking to someone that's not British Chinese. And I think that's the
Yeah.
only way I can say it. It's quite a tough one because, yeah, I don't know. There's a sadness if I have to admit I'm not Chinese
Mm.
or that
Mm-hmm.
Chinese. And then there's a sadness if I say, oh, I'm not British, because
Mm.
I think I occupy three spaces, is the way
Mm.
I view it. I occupy British space, Chinese space, and then the space between that in
Mm.
betweenness, which is Chinese British. And I think that's
Mm.
something that's quite, yeah, it's a tough one. That one is,
Mm.
yeah, that's something I'd like to do a lot more research on.
Yeah, but I think it's very admirable the way you execute it because I resonate so deeply with, especially growing up in a Chinese culture. It's not to generalize, but my experience has been quite reserved, and my conventional understanding of the artist is someone who just works in their studio and is very locked away, and they just produce works and works on end. And it's a
Yeah.
very, sometimes it can be understood as quite inward facing, but public program
Mm.
and like your workshop series, I guess, are a fundamental part of your practice. And I think here, how would you describe the role of the artist in this situation?
Mm. I see myself as a vessel. I'm more a
Mm.
vessel. I would see myself as I'm like an instigator. I'm
Mm.
sparking an idea. I've got an
Mm.
idea, I'm sparking it, and everybody else is going to hopefully come along with that. Or everyone
Mm.
that's interested will come along with that, is
Mm.
the idea. Yeah, it's a tough one because I obviously am an artist because I
Mm.
respond to the work as well. I respond to the
Mm.
words, the stories that I'm collecting.
Mm.
But my work wouldn't be there without those voices. So I
Mm.
would say I'm like an amplifier. I think if
Mm.
I was really going to put it in simple terms, I'm an amplifier.
Mm.
I'm amplifying those voices.
Mm.
That's how I see it. Yeah, it's a tough one.
Yeah, I think this kind of brings me on to think a lot about Roland Barthes' Death of the Author,
Oh
and
yeah.
how he's actually talking about the relationship between the writer and the text. But actually, we can identify this as artist and the work. So I think your
Yeah.
work becomes a very quiet gesture of like invitation, participation, natural collaboration. And
Yeah.
all of these things, we all become authors within your work. And not that the autonomy is lost from the artist, definitely not. I think it is almost enhanced because you are a mediator and you are a facilitator of all of these kind of, I guess, encounters and interactions.
Yeah. 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 That's interesting. Yeah, no, I think there is that. You, I think it's also about when you're collecting all these stories and when I'm
Mm.
collecting all this work or these images or all those, yeah, oral stories, the archiving of this, because it is an archive as
Mm.
well I'm building. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important understanding the end game, as it were. For me, I
Yeah.
it's not just collecting. I could endlessly collect, and that is what a lot of artists can do, can't we? We collect, we
Yeah.
collect, we collect, we make, we make, we make. But I
Yeah.
think for me, the my goal, my what drives me a lot with my work is the fact that it's going to be viewed, it's going to be
Mm.
seen, and it has to be
Mm.
seen. And I'm very
Mm.
keen on, I'm not saying it doesn't make any, I'm not interested if it's not seen, of course,
Mm.
but
Mm.
seen as in there's some legacy involved. I want there
Yeah.
to be legacy. I want there to be, it's a bit
Yeah.
like tumbleweed, isn't it? As
Yeah.
you gather, we gather more. And that's
Yeah.
kind of what I want.
Yeah. I think this is also relates back to your artwork that you showed about Anthony Key and his tinfoil takeaway cartons. I don't know, this is where my mind is going. It's just actually, I think in your talk, in your whole practice, you also view production and process greater than product, which I
Yes.
admire very much, because it's like this idea of the kitchen. It's like when
Mm.
you're talking about your parents come from a takeaway background and opening restaurants, and actually the kitchen can be seen as a very social, collaborative, relational
Mm.
space. And
Yeah.
actually, when you've held workshops at EC, and when I think about your practice and the many conversations that we've had, it is just so important that yes, you are a vessel, but you are also, I guess, the middle ground and middle space for like this collective experience that we can all be a part of, like audience and
Yeah.
participants as well. They become part
Yeah.
of your practice. So I think that's yeah, really interesting concept to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's something that I want to delve into more because
Yeah.
and Anthony Key is somebody that I discovered a long time ago, but haven't
Mm,
revisited for some time. And I think
mm,
as artists, it's our role to keep revisiting and to just keep
mm,
sort of nudging and thinking, okay, well, why was that resonating with me so much? Because I
mm,
found that my practice, not only it is about neurodivergence, um, amplifying those voices, but I'm
mm,
very interested in the British Chinese and
mm,
those little spaces that we hold,
mm,
and
mm,
how do they look if we were
mm,
talking about a manifestation of this, what would it look
mm.
like? I
Yeah,
think it would be really
definitely.
interesting.
And I think it's really interesting the point you talked about art making as a form of connection. And actually, when we
Mm.
think about it, well, being raised in a British Chinese household, it's like food is always a method of gathering. Like it's
Yes.
always, let me chop fruit for you and let me cook for dinner for you. And these spaces are actually so, when we think about it, it's not that deep. But then when we really think about it, it's like these actually become encounters of like relationship. And I think that's what your
Yes.
work is trying to portray also. And I think that's very
Yeah.
poetic in itself.
Thank
I have a
you.
few questions from the
Yeah.
audience. I have one question. Thank you for sharing. Very interesting. I wonder if you are interested in sharing more about your neurodiversity and how you came to know about it.
Oh, yes. Okay. So, yes, I didn't actually say that bit, did I? I just skimmed over. So, my
Dive straight
neurodiversity,
in.
yeah, dive straight in. I was like, yeah, I'm neurodivergent. So I am, I am dyslexic, dyscalculic, dyspraxic. Those were discovered when I did my teacher training. So, quite late
Mm,
on. I did teacher training in 2008, and um, it was suspected on my degree anyway, but no, it was too
mm,
late by then. I was in my third year. It was too late. I'd already done the thesis at pain
mm,
cost, actually. But during my PGCE, one of my tutors said, I think you're dyslexic because you're so articulate on conversation and you
mm,
cite these things and you cite the readings and you talk about all these things that you're interested in and pedagogy and whatever. He said, but when you write it down, it's like a whole different person has written it down. I was like, oh, okay, really? Is that not what I'm reading? I don't know what you're reading. So they sent me off for a screen educational psychologist, and I got screened, and that's what I've got. So I've got dyslexia, which is quite tricky for me. My dyscalculia
mm,
is also tricky. Those of you that don't know dyscalculia, it's number dyslexia, so I have a little bit of a double whammy. Dyspraxia means navigating my own space can be a bit tricky. I'm a bit
mm,
clumsy.
mm,
And also I'm ADHD. So ADHD, I always kind of knew reality, but I think what really gave me the clue was my own children. My two sons that
mm,
have autism, one is definitely ADHD, and they have all other myriad of things going on. And they often joke and said, "You're definitely." They actually think I'm autistic, but I'm thinking, why do I need another label? It's fine. I'm okay with that. But
mm,
I do realize that, yeah, I'm quite um, definitely ADHD was the one that was trickier for me. So I
mm,
felt I'm going to go with that diagnosis because that one is going to give me the most support that I need for the
mm, mm,
difficulties that I have. Autism, I
mm,
think I can navigate, to be fair. So
mm,
it's fine.
mm.
Yeah, I don't need another one.
Yeah,
I
thank
hope
you for
that
sharing
answers
that
the
with us.
question.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Um, I Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think your work touches a lot upon exploration and play and fostering a space for that. And I
Mm.
think I don't know, do you see your work, like, do you see your practice also as a therapeutic method or a ritualistic practice that you can release all of these, um, I guess, emotions or yeah, in your
Yeah,
practice?
yeah, it's interesting you say that actually, because I think the act of art making and the workshops is
Mm,
probably quite cathartic and quite
mm,
art therapy based and driven. I
yeah,
use a lot of art therapy research when I'm trying to think about how I conduct a new workshop and how
yeah,
it looks. And it's quite repetitive because it makes it
mm,
easier for people to understand what they're doing. But I think the act of actually making, I think, then becomes my own process driven
mm,
cathartic movements.
mm,
And again,
mm,
slightly repetitive
mm,
because I use the same process, though the outcome is always different.
mm,
So nothing ever, I can never make one piece of work exactly the same as the other,
mm.
ever, which is much like
Yeah,
neurodiversity.
yeah,
You know, we're all different. I mean, we're all different on the neurotypical world as well, but, you know, in terms of the disability and talking about social models and constructs, that's what I'm addressing, that
mm,
we're all different.
mm. Yeah.
So,
I
yeah.
have one more comment from the audience. I agree. The British-born Chinese identity slash space slash characteristics slash humor, etc., is definitely something in and of itself. This is different from OBC, overseas born Chinese, or immigrant to UK either from a young age or for education. So I'm glad other people are in the same boat.
Oh, that's lovely. That's really nice to hear. I'm very interested in that actually. I
Yeah.
am, I am in the process of, I've been talking a lot and thinking a lot about this research of
Mm,
British Chinese liminality,
mhm,
that space in between otherness. I suppose
mm,
that's why I called the project Mind the Gap, because I feel like we are
mm,
in the gap in the both all
mhm,
senses of British Chinese culture and how
mm,
that's driven. Um,
mm.
yeah, it's something I think hasn't been researched a lot,
Mm.
and
And
it's
I,
something
I
I
def
really want to look at.
yeah, I definitely hope that this gap will one day become a territory because I think I've
Mm,
always seen it as like a gap or a space that no one really understands or is brave enough to step foot in because there's so I think growing up as a British born Chinese, you touched upon this too. You always feel like you're the only one because at school you're the only Chinese looking Chinese, but you I don't know, speak the same way as the other students in class, but you're not really the same. So yeah, I think as we surface, this is all about surfacing these narratives and
mm,
telling these hidden
mm.
stories. And I think yeah, one day it will become a new
Yeah, what
landscape where we define
I
that.
think it's definitely got to be defined actually,
Mm,
and more and more work on it. I mean, this is something
mm,
very much I'm interested in. In fact, so much so that I've been looking to into the whole idea of a PhD around it. I really want to go
mm,
and delve deeper into this
yeah,
theory because I think it's a space that hasn't been touched upon in that sense, and
yeah,
navigating that even with neurodiversity within British Chinese, I think could be
yeah,
quite interesting.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. And I think it's also a very collective space and collaborative space where we can all
Mm.
share within.
Yeah.
So I guess talking about participation, we're going to
Yes.
uh, just conclude the talk with an activity that Alison has prepared for us. So would you like to share your screen again, Alison?
Yeah. So I asked everyone to bring a pen and paper, and this is what we're going to do. Is that working? Okay. So
Yeah,
here we are.
perfect.
I'll keep this on screen. So basically, what I want you to do is I want you to have a piece of paper. This is something that I do quite a lot with participants at the end of any kind of sessions that they've had with me, depending on how how they've taken the sessions with me.
Mm,
So what I was going to say was you get a piece of paper, you literally tear a strip off it. And what I'd really like you to do on that bit that you've teared off, I'd really like you to write a safe secret message. So maybe a moment that you would like to share, but not really share at the same time. I think we all have something that's deep delve in our hearts that we might want to share and want to talk to someone about it, but can't. So I often ask people to write it, draw it, It could be one word, it could be many. And that's something I'd really like you to think about. Once you've done that, let's see. I'm hoping everyone's done doing that, writing their note. I'm going to write something also. Okay. So if you've written it, what I'd really like you to do, once you've written your note, I scrunch it. I fold it so that you can roll it, you can fold it. Everybody's different. Some people like to just coil it over, but it's up to you, whatever's good. I then place that piece of paper on top of the bit that's left, as you can see on my PowerPoint slide. And then I leave it there because I know that that's got that message there. I know it's in there, but I can't see it because you've scrunched it. And then what I usually ask people to do is write a response or reply to your safe secret message. So it can be a dialogue about it, just really thinking about what you've written and how you can respond to what you've written. And there's no right or wrong on these. So I'm going to give you guys a few moments to add a response. Okay. I'm not going to, I mean, you can go on for hours, and I know some people that have written me pages to their responses, but just really thinking about this, the evaluation of this process. I mean, if anybody wants to share their response, that'd be great. Maybe you could put it in the chat, or it's up to you. Or if anybody would like to comment to the response, again, if you think, you know, what you think this process did for you, did it help? What's your ideal response? And my end thoughts are always, what would your ideal response be from someone else to your reply? So these things are, it's quite nice that we can talk about them, and what I hope from this exercise is a slightly reflective exercise, that we share in a most safe message, but we're not sharing it really because we can't see it. And there's something really, really safe and what's the word I'm looking for? Just calming, I think, about being able to do that, to hold that space. Hence, a lot of these workshops I always call holding space, because we are holding that space there. And I just hope that if one day, maybe I often do this quite a lot for myself, and then I put it away, and then later I bring it back and I read my message and I read the response, and then I might add to it again. So these are things that are really, I find really interesting in how we evaluate how we feel and how would we really want somebody to respond to that safe message. So they're the thoughts that I want to leave you with. I don't know if anybody wanted to say any. Did we have any?
Yeah, thank you so much for leading that workshop with us. I think it's such a nice way to just be able to wind down and reflect after a very filled talk. Someone's response, absolutely love this workshop. It's a beautiful way to process my thoughts and look at it in a different perspective, to speak truth to myself.
That's lovely. Yeah, that's really
very
nice.
positive.
That's good. Good.
I've had a couple of questions about how to be in contact with Alison. In the webinar chat, if everyone can see, if you would like to learn more about Alison's practice, her past projects, what she's working on currently, even ways to connect with her on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, I think, email address, please visit Alison's website that is in the chat now. It's www.alisonlam.art. So you'll be able to get in touch with the artist and learn more about her processes, methodologies, and philosophies of working.
Yeah. And yeah, thank you. I'm glad
Great.
people
Thank
enjoyed
you
the workshop.
yeah. Thank you so much for collaborating with us, Alison. And I hope everyone has enjoyed the talk. Let me just check the final. Thank you. Thank you. Everyone says thank you.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alison.